Welcome to another episode of the Art Inside the Craft podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Glazier, and this is episode number 11. Today's guest is a guy that is doing so many interesting things, it's honestly hard to keep up. Al Torrence owns and runs Music Garden Studios in Pennsylvania, as well as being a guitar player for the Allegheny High, who are the backing band and studio band for my last guest, Charles Wesley Godwin. Al has produced a number of incredible albums, including both Seneca and How the Mighty Fall for Charles, and is currently working on a new album for singer-songwriter and a gentleman I also recently interviewed, Clint Park. Al and I talk about his musical start, how he acquired the studio that became Music Garden Studios, and how he approaches music production. Let's listen in on the interview with Al Torrence. So I always kind of like to start off the podcast just kind of telling people, first of all, where I first met you or saw you, and that was over at Woolies. I was photographing Charles Wesley Godwin over there at Woolies, and so then I kind of started digging into your guys' music a little more. And I don't know if there's a lot of engineers and producers that are out on tour on a regular basis. So I thought that was really cool, and was kind of one of the several reasons that I wanted to talk to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. A part of it is that I'd always wanted to do something like that because it gets me out of the studio, and I don't have to, sit in a room with no windows in it for hours on end.
Right.
And I always thought that would be a cool way to, make a living. And, meeting Charles and being able to do it with him has just been a dream come true.
Yeah. It's really cool. You just don't, like most of the guys you see that are engineering and producing, they just kind of go from one album to the next. But I think it's really cool that you and the guys kind of stick out there on the road and just roll with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So also I kind of like to just start, I always find it interesting how people ended up getting into music. I personally, my dad used to listen to a lot of Jim Croce music.
Oh yeah.
And so,
love Jim Croce.
Yeah. So I'd listen to that and I was like, I really want to learn how to figure that out. I still haven't figured out how to play a lot of his songs. It's kind of a tough one to start with, but
when I was growing up, my buddy, his dad looked exactly like Jim Croce, like mustache and everything. And I remember listening to Jim Croce and looking at those records, and I was real young, and I thought like that was my buddy's dad.
That's funny.
but no, I got started. My mom actually put me in piano lessons when I was super young. I was in like kindergarten, and I started playing piano on a pretty classical, basis, and kind of hated it because all my friends were out doing fun stuff and I was stuck in piano lessons. But I did that more and more, and then started to pick up other instruments. Like in high school they make you do band stuff, so I played saxophone through high school.
Oh, cool.
And then finally when I got into like 7th and 8th grade, more into high school, I was like, man, I want to play something fun. And I grew up on the music we were talking about, like 70s music. So guitar just seemed like the right thing to play. And I got an acoustic guitar from my grandpa. He kind of had one laying around, and I started on that. And just kind of I fell in love with it as soon as I started playing it. And I just wouldn't put it down, walking around the house, and just it was always on. And it just kind of fit me well, I think.
Wow, that's great. Did you then did you have any desire to like play in a band, or did you just kind of want to figure everything out and do just that?
It's funny. I think you get into guitar for that reason. Like nobody wants to sit in their room and play by themselves. So I think the aspiration to play in a band was there. And I did for a little bit, through high school. We had like little cover bands and stuff. My guitar teacher, Dave Granati, actually hosted jam nights and played regularly. So I played a lot with him growing up, which was nice to get exposure on stage and get in front of people. And then, matriculating through college, going to a music school, you see like how good people are. It's not that I lost like an aspiration to play, but I kind of like got more realistic with myself and said, maybe I should go to school for something a little more tangible, which is why I ended up doing the recording thing at school. And kind of left with that idea that, I'd work in a studio and kind of just be a guitar player in sessions more so in a band.
Wow. So did you also pick up, because I know you play a couple of different instruments as well, like the mandolin, like on, just rolling through the Seneca credits, and there's a few different instruments that you play on there. Did you just kind of pick those up along the way, or was there something specific you wanted to learn?
A lot of the stuff on Seneca was more just necessity driven. Like, I don't consider myself a mandolin player at all. Just because I play guitar doesn't mean I can play bass, even though, I can pick up a bass and kind of play it. Mandolin's a similar way. Like, I can play chords and kind of fret some stuff, but when we were doing Seneca, it was real loose with the recording, and we were kind of just figuring things out. So I didn't want to go through the process of having to find a mandolin player and kind of talk to Chuck about it. So I had this old one sitting around the studio and thought, like, well, let me just put some of that on the track, and if Charles doesn't say anything, then maybe it'll be good. It was like, funny. Let me just put it in and see if he likes it. And he didn't say he didn't like it. So I was like, yeah, let's just keep it in. But definitely for the next, go around, I was like, we need to find a guy. Like, I'm not the mandolin player for this. And but that was true for mandolin and piano. That was just because I was just doing it but by ourselves, really. It's just Chuck and I for the most part. And was like, yeah, well, I can play some piano, so I'll put it on there. And again, he seemed to like it, and I was okay with it. So that was a lot of how that first record went for us.
Oh, cool. And how did you, and I don't know if I'm jumping way too far in your career or whatever, but how did you end up starting Music Garden Studios? Like, when did that start up?
Out of college, I worked in Pittsburgh, which is where I'm from, and I worked in a studio up there for a while. I think it was like 5 years I worked in a place, and it was great. I loved it, and the people I worked with was great. The guy who owned it, Garrett Haynes, is a mastering engineer, and I still use him for mastering like Charles's records and all that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it was getting to a point where Garrett wanted to downsize a little bit from the place he was at, which would have meant that instead of having my own room there, we would have to share a room in the new spot. And I kind of knew at one point that I couldn't work for somebody for the rest of my career, because there's just not a ton of money in records when you're making them independent. So it was either go out and find a place for myself and own a studio, or possibly move to a bigger city and try to work at a big studio or for a label or something like that. So when that time was coming out, I was actually really considering moving out to LA. I have a family member, kind of a distant family member, who is out in the movie industry. And I talked to him about maybe staying at his place for a little bit while I try to get my feet on the ground. And that was kind of the plan for a little bit. What had happened was, back where I grew up, which is north of Pittsburgh, there was this recording studio in this little town, and it was one of these places where, like, you would drive by it and you wouldn't even pay attention to it if you didn't know it was there.
Yeah.
But I had known about it just because of the local history, and I think my dad talked about it. And one day I was talking to my dad, and he was like, why don't you just go down there just to see what the guy's up to? I mean, like, it's not going to hurt anything. And so I was like, okay. So, just walked in the door and talked to Don Garvin, who was the old owner of Music Garden. He had called it Jeree Recording. And, like, lo and behold, he was looking to retire. He was kind of towards the end of his career, and he didn't do a lot of recording really in the studio anymore. And the more I got to talk to him, the more I kind of realized that this guy was really motivated to see the studio continue on as a studio.
Oh, cool.
I think Don, because it's built in a house, he didn't want to see it just become like apartments or, some commercial property or something like that. Yeah. So I think what was motivating for him is that he wanted to find a guy that would still run it as a studio. And what was motivating for me is the fact that, number one, there was a studio for sale, which there's not a lot of those around.
Right.
And it had legitimately, like, really good equipment in it. Like, it had tape machines and vintage microphones and consoles and all the stuff that I would love to work on and work with. So so it just seemed right. Like I couldn't say no to it. You know, it's kind of one of those stars aligned type deals. and yeah, so we just worked it out, and I was able to purchase it from him and spent about a year renovating it because it needed updated. But yeah, once I got that out of the way, then just kind of hit the ground running, and been trying to make it work ever since.
Wow. That's really perfect timing. Everything just happened the right way, you know?
Yeah. It was really one of those things where I could have, could have just decided to leave Pittsburgh and went off and did something different. But he really said, like, you know, if you hadn't walked in when you did, I think I might have just sold all the gear individually in the studio and just kind of like liquidated the thing, because he just couldn't find anybody else to buy it. You know, it's not, the studio market isn't exactly a fruitful market.
Wow.
Especially in Western Pennsylvania, right, north of Pittsburgh. There's not many people walking through the door trying to buy studios.
That's crazy.
So, yeah, so it worked out for the best, I think.
Wow, that's great. And so another thing I'm always super kind of overly nerdy interested in is, what is your recording process like? Like I know you work with a lot of other bands, so do you like to track stuff live? Do you prefer to kind of do like individual takes, mix it all together, you know, redo stuff as it needs it? Or
I think about this a lot, you know, obviously. I think for me it's set high expectations and then work backward from there. So to me, like, the perfect recording session would be tracking everything live and being able to use everything from those takes as your final mixing point. So it's always program dependent too. You know, I work with some guys who do pop, and that's a very, very different style. But I would say for the most part, like, what ends up happening is we go in attempting to get as many things in takes as we can. So definitely drums and bass for sure. If we're doing piano, I'd love to get that with it as well. Maybe rhythm guitar, things like that. But ideally what we try to do in here is play the song enough times so that you have minimal drum edits when you're done with it. I was actually talking to BJ Barnum from American Aquarium, just those crazy things. He was at one of the shows we were playing at, and he said one of the best things he figured out to do was not edit drums if you don't have to, because once you start to get into drum edits, you can never replicate feel. Like, that's just something that just kind of happens.
Right.
So what we try to do when we're doing tracks, and we did it this weekend, is once we have the song down, play it to where at least drums and bass, that's the take for sure. And then if you get other things, like, great, that's a plus, but we go back and then start to overdub whatever needs to be done. And then really, like, the last part of the process, just because I work with a lot of singer-songwriters, is, if possible, love to record singers while they play acoustic guitar, because it seems like they're more natural and they sing better that way.
Right.
So definitely shoot for that. But if not, then we'll just work to whatever's best to facilitate the artist. That sounds super industry, but you know how it goes.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. You know, I did. I actually released it not long ago, but I had a conversation with John Cooney about 4 or 5 years ago, and he's the guy that he has a series called One Mic Series, and then he also did all of, like, the Joe Satriani stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and that dude is just super. Like, I talked to him for over an hour, and I could have kept going for another hour, just because his One Mic Series, he records everybody in one room at one time off of one ribbon microphone.
No way.
Yeah, you got to check it out. Go look up One Mic Series.
Okay. And it's not just bluegrass, it's other things as well?
It's everything.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
that's
full bands, singer-songwriters, everybody. And
okay. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah, one of the most important things that I kind of took away from that is, he says, you know, of modern recording, you can add up to hundreds of tracks if you want, and people can come in. They don't have to really, they're not playing with their bandmates. So he questions, are you getting the best performance every time? Because they're not really having a conversation with the other members of the band. You're just coming in, punching in your part and going.
Exactly.
So that's always something that I really find interesting, is how people record and what their process is. It's just a piece of nerdy information.
So I love that. I would do every session that way if modern recording techniques didn't require kick and snare to be super loud.
Right.
Like if they accepted more of that, I would 100% spend 8 hours on like 2 songs just to get the take right, but not have to worry about like mixing it after. That would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely understand. That's the way it just kind of has to go, but
I'll tell you though, the one thing I will say is that drum leakage in vocal mics is a huge pet peeve of mine. I love like parallel compressing vocals and making them shine on top. And I've yet to find a good way to do that if there's a lot of drums in them. So typically what I'll do, like, I don't care if there's leakage in anything else. Like guitar can leak into bass into pedal steel. Like I don't care anything about that. But I think the one thing that I would kind of push for in most recordings is a clean vocal.
Sure.
So like beyond that, like I'm really good with anything else.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also had the opportunity to go to Applehead Studios up in Woodstock probably 3-4 years ago, and Rich Robinson from the Black Crowes was recording an album, and that ended up turning into the Magpie Salute band anyway. And so I got to sit in the control room for like 2 days and just watch all of that happening. So recording is always kind of an interesting, I love obviously just sitting down and listening to music, but if you want to tell me why this microphone does this and how it ends up adding this to the vocals, I love to hear it.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
What were those Robinson sessions like? Like, were they loose or was it pretty tight?
Yeah, it was really crazy because it was basically a lot of the guys that were in the Black Crowes, like Mark Ford was there, Eddie Harsh was there before he passed away, Nico. Anyway, but it was real, like they set up chairs inside the studio and people were actually sitting in there. One foot away from where the guys were playing, and then they'd hit start, and I mean those guys are all just super pro musicians, so they got through most of it just fine. I don't even know if they might have taken a second take a couple of times, but I don't recall anybody ever like stopping or anything. They just kind of played and rolled through it,
No, man, that's the dream, man. I mean, like I just think about how quick records would go if we were able to work more like that. You know? I could do like 100 records a year that way. Yeah.
It's got to be somewhat labor intensive and time consuming to do that, but
yeah.
So that was a great sidetrack.
Man, I can go on for days about recording, so just be careful about the questions you ask.
That's funny. And so also when I talked to Charles not long ago, the interesting thing that you guys also do, like I've kind of already mentioned, is the same guys that are in the studios are generally the same guys that are out on the road. Which I kind of think makes everything kind of click together. So can you just give like a little introduction on who you generally have in the studio? I mean, not specifically just for Charles' stuff, but are there kind of those guys you always bring in and play on stuff if you need them?
I'm happy to do that. So Joe Pinciotti, I've known for almost half my life. He's our drummer, and we grew up together in the jam nights that I was talking to you about.
Oh, cool.
Nate Catanzarite is a little bit younger than us, but not much. So he kind of joined into those circles of jams a little bit later, but we really got to know each other more after I got back from college. And he's just a phenomenal bass player. Went to school for classical studies on the bass. Joe is just like a practitioner of drums, and he's always practicing and just blows me away every time. Eric Dahl is like one of my best friends, and I trust him, musically with so many things because he just is very honest about it. He plays the auxiliary stuff in the band. So like 12-string guitar, electric guitar, trumpet, things like that. We grew up together as well. Reed Connolly, who's pedal steel, he was a Pittsburgh guy that I didn't know, but just out of necessity of like needing a pedal steel for playing more of the shows, he came to the band because Max Somerville, our piano player, knew him. So everybody kind of had like one connection to another. There was never really this like gun for hire type relationship. And then Reed was with us through the early days when we started to play out. And Max, who really had a successful band in Pittsburgh, I always wanted to play with him in a band myself. And it wasn't until a little bit more when we got to do more records at the studio here, I talked to him about playing for Charles, and that's when he kind of migrated over from the stuff he was doing to more of the stuff that we were doing. And Max thinks about music in a way that like I've never thought about. He's very emotional when it comes to music, and just is very instant in his reactions, and I just love that about him. So it's really interesting, Jeremy, because like everybody brings such a different piece to the puzzle in the band. Some people bring inspirational elements or creative elements. Other people bring more traditional, theory elements, like educational elements, things like that. So I'm just so lucky to be able to be around all these guys, because it makes my life easier when I have to figure things out or play with them. And I think Charles would agree with this if you asked him. It's less of like individuals participating, more just a unit of people kind of being one thing when we all play together. Right. And I just love it so much.
Yeah, and that's why I brought it up, because it really comes through on stage, how well you guys, I mean, you could throw 5 guys that are great musicians out there and it'll sound good, but you guys really have that connection, and you can kind of see the interplay, like when you're doing songs, you'll nod at each other or do certain things, and you just all kind of know which way you're going. So,
well, I think a lot of us just can't believe that we actually get to do it. We grew up wanting to do it so badly, and now actually getting the opportunity to do it. I think one thing we said, getting into this is like, never forget to be grateful about the things that we're doing. So like every show, we always say like, hey, this could be the last show. You never know. Let's just go out and have the most fun possible. And I think what we have found is that like when we have fun, it's way more fun for everybody else watching.
Sure.
Because a lot of people will come up and be like, oh man, you guys look like you're really enjoying yourself. And we're just like, yeah, why wouldn't we? This is like the funnest thing ever to do in the world. Why would we not want to, have fun on stage?
Right. Plus, I would imagine all that touring time and being together kind of lends itself to some good songwriting. And once you get back to the studio or back home, you can kind of go, hey, remember that thing we were messing around with? Let's try that. And
Absolutely. Yeah. So many of the it's interesting how you build a set as you're on the road. You think you do it in rehearsal because you want to prepare for it, but really like getting the songs, like testing them out in person and seeing how the crowd reacts. Is that a popular song that the crowd really reacts to, or did that not one work that well? What's been interesting to me playing so much with the guys and Charles is that we really do tinker with the set so much from show to show, to where by the end of it now, we really feel like we have such a strong set. Like, it's way better than it was earlier in the year, in my opinion. Not that the songs are any different or whatever, but just the order of the songs seemed to lend itself in a special way that we just really had to figure out as we were playing them. So, that's an interesting part of tour that really caught me off guard.
Good. And so the new album, well, actually, I wanted to say one more thing. This is a funny thing that there was a couple of funny things that Charles said when I was talking to him. And I had told him that on Pour It On, off of Seneca, that that you did some really incredible guitar stuff that reminded me of like Brian May's guitar solos. And he was like, "Oh, when you talk to Al, you got to tell him that. He'll love that."
I love that. Yeah, thank you.
So
I mean,
there was just some really cool I don't know, things you were doing in there that were neat. So I thought that was cool.
It's funny because I struggle with that a little bit because it's not within the style, but I stick by the fact that that's what makes it cool to me is that we are doing something that maybe if you went down to Nashville that wouldn't be put on a record per se. So, and the other thing too that I always tell Charles is like our influences are not heavily country growing up. Like we come from all schools of music. So like those things like that you're talking about, like they're definitely going to pop out every once in a while because sometimes we just can't hold it back.
Yeah.
We're, kind of bred in like that.
But that's what makes it super interesting for people listening, is that when you hear that, you're like, well, that may not be like traditional, a country solo or, you might be expecting some chicken picking or something, but
exactly.
Here comes Al with some Brian May solo, which is sweet.
Well, it kind of happened on the new record too. The last track, How the Mighty Fall, has a solo that like has an auto wah on it.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things. I mean, we all love the Grateful Dead. Like we just love that like freeness in their music. And I have a Qtron, and I was really struggling with that solo, trying to figure out how to make it special. And I remember in the lyric, heard her newborn baby cry. I thought like, well, like an auto wah is kind of like a cry in a way. Mm-hmm. So like, let me put this on and send it to Chuck and not tell him that it's on there. And if he says that's great, then I'm just going to keep it. And he came back and he's like, man, like I love that solo. And I was like, yeah, me too. I was hoping you were going to say that.
Oh, that's funny. I'm actually the album, the physical copy is supposed to be delivered to my house today. So
nice.
I'm actually,
did you get the colored one, the blue one?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So I'm kind of anxious to throw it on the turntable here in a little bit. See how
man. Yeah. We've been waiting anxiously for those too.
Yeah. And another kind of funny thing that Charles had said when I was asking him about the new album and stuff is I always kind of like to find out, from between albums, is there anything, and you kind of said it like with the solo, is there anything that you wanted to do different on the new album, How the Mighty Fall, that didn't happen on the first one?
Well, one thing I wanted to do was understand what the songs were going to be a little bit earlier in the process. Well, I should explain that better. Understand musically and production wise how the songs are going to be earlier in the process. The songs that Charles presents to us are pretty much the full product. We're not going to adjust those heavily unless there's a weak spot that we all kind of recognize. But what had happened with the last record, the first one, was that really we played them as acoustic songs with drums and bass, and then went from there with what's going to be played on it. So going into the next record, my biggest thing is I wanted to know, at least on a demo level, like what's everybody going to be playing here? And now that we have had the luxury of all the guys in the band being able to play the songs, together, what I wanted to do, and I think what everybody felt was necessary, was to craft the song in as much as we could in a rehearsal space. So we didn't want the song to not be able to sound great unless we were the ones playing it. So like we didn't want to have to rely on like overdubs basically.
Gotcha.
To make the songs what they were. And we wanted the song to facilitate itself based off what we could do as a band playing the song. And I think a lot of that too was that we wanted them to sound great when we played them live, and we didn't want to have to, think that they were lesser because we didn't have all the parts for them. So going into the record, we spent like 3 days really just getting all our parts figured out ahead of time, and use those demos as a bit of a roadmap when we actually did the real recording. So we knew if there was going to be a piano part in this section, we knew to leave space for it. And we knew about what Max was going to do. instead of previously at the, the first record, there would be a big gap, and Charles and I would kind of sit there and be like, well, what should we put on here now?
Gotcha.
So that, I would say that was the biggest thing that we wanted to tackle. And honestly, the other thing too was that I wrestled with it, and I think everybody else did, was that you want to make a new record that sounds fresh and sounds new and exciting, but Charles's first record did well because of what made it so good, which is the songs and his voice and the characters. So what I think what we wanted to do was figure out a line that amplified all of that and didn't take away from the songs, and made it exciting and made it theatrical, but also still left enough room that the production and the playing didn't bury the core of what people like Charles's music for, which is, at the end of the day, it's the songs,
right,
and the stories. So that's what we were really going into. That was what was in our heads going into this next record.
Yeah, it's really great. I've been listening to it. He sent me the digital version so that I could check it all out, preparing for our interview and stuff. And it's really fantastic. I really loved it. So
Thank you.
I think it's going to be another big hit. Yeah.
It's been doing well so far. I'm always surprised, putting music out, like the reception. You tend to get in your own head when you have to sit on projects, for a while waiting for it to release, and you second guess yourself. But the response has been great, and I think we all really appreciate, how well people have responded to it so far. Yeah,
it's fantastic. That's why I'm always anxious to get the physical copy and, pour through the liner notes and look at all the pictures and all that stuff. I'm still old school like that.
Yeah, I love all that too, so I don't blame you.
So what, just as far as what's happening with you, away from the touring and stuff, do you have more people coming in to record albums, or is there anybody you've been working with that you're kind of excited about?
Yeah, I just did a record with Clint Park.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Clint's the man, dude. We did 6 songs, so I don't know if those are considered records nowadays or not. But when we were doing a lot of the Ward shows, Clint was playing bass for Ward, and then also doing opening slots with us as well.
Right.
And at one point he decided that he'd like to go off and do his own thing independently, and to do that he wanted to support that with new music. And we had just been around him so much, and had hung out with him, and he had seen us play pretty regularly, that he approached the band and said, I would just like to make a record with you guys. Like that would sound fun to me.
That's cool.
And we were on it. We were like, yeah, that would be so fun, man. So we were able to schedule it this time. It's beginning of December, when we had our off break, and he had happened to be touring kind of around this area because he's from Nashville. So he wanted to make it work where he didn't have to make a certain trip up here. So he came in, pretty Nashville style recording where we didn't really know the songs ahead of time. So he would present us with a song, we would chart it out, get the feel for it, and then put it down as best we could. And I gotta say, man, like we were really happy with how it turned out.
Good.
Yeah, it's been a really fun process, and he wanted to keep it loose, not put a lot of pressure on us, and he did a great job of that. So we just finished that up yesterday, and that'll be coming out sometime next year. There's a really cool guy, you should check him out too. His name's Josh Travis. He's from Erie, Pennsylvania. Okay. And his record will be done beginning of next year as well. We're finishing that up, and that is I think 10 songs on it total, 9 or 10. So that'll be a full one that I'm pretty excited about. But yeah, overall, it's I have to say, like the studio side of things has definitely slowed because of just the lack of time that I've been here. So I've been trying to do as much of it as I can, and make the most of the time when I'm back. But the touring stuff, just there's no way around it. It just takes up all your time.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks for taking the time to chat with me today. And I'll definitely continue to follow along and keep an eye out for those albums that you're working on coming out. And
Perfect, man. Well, I appreciate the offer. I'm happy to do it anytime you want to have me.
I can't thank Al enough for taking the time to be a guest on my podcast and share some of the incredible projects that he's working on in and out of the studio. In addition to Al, I want to thank Charles, Joe, Max, Reed, Nate, and Eric for the conversation and camaraderie after the recent show here in Iowa when I had the opportunity to photograph them. You can find a link to some of those photos in the podcast description or by visiting Black Cat Bone Productions on Instagram. And speaking of Black Cat Bone Productions, I want to thank them for being a continued sponsor, as well as PureMountainCoffee.com. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes coming very soon, and I'll see you all down the road.